MVR program. It's been a little over a year now since we started doing this, but there's a lot of you out there that are probably new to this. In fact, over the last couple months, we've added probably 200 members into the program as we've decided that this should be a mandatory part of our auto liability program here at the Trust. It makes a lot of sense, and it's been a really useful program. A lot of members have given us positive feedback on it, and especially members who maybe at first weren't sure if they wanted to participate in a driver monitoring program like this. Once they got involved with it and saw the information that was made available to them, they have been very enthusiastic about it. So I want to take some time to talk to you about the benefits of a driver monitoring program and a driver qualification policy, and how the program that we're doing looks, and the information that's available to you with the Trust's MVR program or driver qualification program. Like I said, we've been doing this for a little bit over a year now, and in that time we have collected information on about 8,500 different drivers who are employees or volunteers for our member entities across the state. We've got close to 300 members fully, who've submitted their information now, and we're getting them integrated into the program. It's kind of interesting when we look at all these records. We initially take your information, we run the MVRs on your employees, and then we let you know what's going on with them. When you're in the program, we send you a report every month that lets you know if there's been any new violations, added to any of your driver's records. It helps us keep track of whether they have valid licenses or not. And it helps us make good decisions about who should be driving our vehicles. What we found is that a lot of our members, prior to adopting or joining this MVR program, just looked at whether a driver had a valid license as to their qualifications to drive. And there's a lot more to it than that. We can see if you've got someone who's got a lot of speeding tickets, that may be a good indication of someone that we don't want to select to be, part of our driving program. Doesn't necessarily mean that we don't want them working with us or for us, but depending on the nature of their job, that may be the case. And so it's important that we look at these. Out of these 8,500 or so records that we're currently monitoring, about 1,344 of those have some sort of violation on their record, a speeding ticket or something else on their record, about 1,700 violations. So we can see on average most people who have something on their record, it's probably just one item on their record. The types of things that we've been finding mostly when we run your employees' driver or motor vehicle records are speeding tickets. That's the big one. That's the #1 item that we'll see on there. That's also a pretty good indicator of what some people's driving habits may be. Someone has one speeding ticket on their record, I'm not sure if I'm going to get too worried about that, but when I see 2 or 3 speeding tickets on someone's MVR, it really kind of tells me that there's a habit there. That's a kind of a driving characteristic of that person. Other types of violations that we see a lot of are failure to yield or failure to obey a traffic sign or signal, an improper something. You see, there's 72 of those currently in the violations that we have reported to our members. Improper, I call those the accident violations. Someone, did an improper turn, they did an improper signal. That's usually what a police officer will write on a ticket after an accident. So some of these give us a little bit of a clue as to what's going on. When I see an improper violation, that usually tells me there was probably a car accident. But we see more and more actually careless or inattentive driving. We're even seeing more and more of the texting while driving violations coming up. It's not uncommon to see too fast for conditions, which could just be like a speeding ticket in bad weather, or it could also be something that is post an accident where it's determined the driver was going faster than what was safe in the conditions, following too close. Actually, currently there's only about 12 of those in there, but I've seen a lot of these, and again, that's probably a post-accident ticket. But, following close is a big indicator of someone's driving habits. And so those are all things that, we want to be aware of if they're happening, especially if they're happening with any kind of frequency. Like I said, one ticket may not be a big deal, but when we start to see 2 or 3 or 4, that really starts to tell a story. And really one of the most interesting things that we've discovered as we've done this program and monitored these records every month is how many people out there are driving with an invalid license. A lot of the members, when they submit their data to us the first time, you're sending us a list of all your drivers that's possibly happening. And really what we're looking for is just a list of the people that you authorize to drive a vehicle as part of their employment. So that's the first thing I want you to kind of think about as we're going through here today. And if you aren't already in the program, if you're planning on sending your information in, we're only looking for those who are authorized to drive. I've gotten some entities have sent me records where I have 3 or 4 people with learner's permits, you know, teenagers, 15-year-olds with learner's permits. I hope those aren't authorized drivers at your entity. And so remember, we're looking to monitor those people who are driving our vehicles or who we've authorized to drive our vehicle. Over the last year and a half, as we've been bringing new members into this program, we have identified 141 different drivers that members have submitted to us as being authorized drivers who at the time had an invalid license. And that's really telling. You know, a lot of those invalid licenses are clerical problems at the, you know, with the paperwork that's been submitted for a lot of commercial drivers, but a lot of them are expired licenses. A lot of them are licenses for people who have moved out of state and they have a license from another state now, but we're still submitting to us the information on a moved license, and those are not valid licenses. And so we'll talk a little bit more detail here in a few minutes about, you know, what is a valid or what's an invalid license and what they mean. But it's surprising that close to 2% of all the drivers that we bring into this program, that we initially bring into this program, are have invalid licenses. And that's definitely something you want to know. If you've given someone the keys and putting them behind the wheel, you want to know if they have a valid license. Just the fact that they show you a copy of their driver's license that shows a valid date on it doesn't mean that license is valid. It's very important to check the MVR to be sure. It's interesting when we talk about what is the norm for drivers and what they have on their records. The norm is not to have anything on their record whatsoever. Over 84%, close to 85% of all the drivers that we're currently monitoring have perfectly clean driving records. And I think sometimes we get this attitude out there, well, it's not unusual to have 1 or 2 speeding tickets or, you know, violations on your record. And if you got 3 on there, that's no big deal. But what I want you to see is that really is unusual. We have currently 7,200 drivers out of our 8,500 that don't have anything on their record. A little over 1,000 have 1 ticket only on their record. So that's 12% of the entire pool that we're monitoring right now that has 1 only ticket. And then it goes down from there. Out of our entire 8,500 driver pool, we're looking at 2 people who have 2 violations on their record. There's 208 of those. There's 50 who have 3 violations on their record. There's 17 that have 4 violations on their record, and there's only 9 drivers out of 8,500 who have 5 or more violations on their record. And if we kind of look at this, what this really tells us is that the people who have multiple violations on their record are really the minority. It's not that common. Only 3.3% of our drivers have 2 or more violations on their record. If we look at the ones with 3 or more violations, that's only 0.9%. So it's a little bit less than 1 out of every 100 drivers. So if you've got a driver who has 3 violations on his record, you know, he is in the worst, you know, group out of 100 drivers. If you're looking at 100 drivers, this guy's got 3 violations. He's probably got the worst driving record in that group. And then if we jump up to 4, then it's 0.3%, and at 5, it's only 0.1%, or 1 in 1,000. So when we talk about, determining what is acceptable, to have someone driving for our entity, it's really not that unreasonable to start looking at people when they have 3 violations or more on their record, because that is an extreme minority of the driving population that has that many violations on their record. In fact, we also look at this because this is a good indicator of the risk that's involved with our driving program. We've told you over the years many times that the greatest areas where we experience loss in the trust is, on the sewer system backups and on automotive claims, car accident claims. If we've got a driver who has 2 tickets in the last 3 years, that driver represents a 32% greater risk that they will have another accident within the next 2 to 3 years. If you've got a driver who has 4 tickets on their record, they're 75% more likely to have an accident in the next few years. 6 tickets, 131% more likely to have an accident in the next few years. So really, when we start looking at these people with 3 or 4 or 5 tickets, these are people that have a significantly elevated risk of automobile accidents. And so we want to take a look at those. Also, it's good to be aware of accidents that they've had. If they've had 2 accidents in the last 3 years, they're 78%, almost twice as likely to have an accident in the next few years again. So the tickets are an indicator of the likelihood of accidents, and having had accidents in the past is also an indicator of the likelihood that they may have an accident. So when we talk about having a driver qualification policy, really what we're saying is that you shouldn't just be checking to make sure a driver has a valid license or that he has a license in his wallet. We should actually be looking to see what kind of driver are they before we hand over the keys to them of our biggest risk that we have. Things that we may want to take into consideration when adopting a driver qualification policy is how many accidents have they had? How many violations do they have on their records? And so there's some things we want to understand. Number one, accidents don't show up on the MVR as an accident per se. The only thing we see on MVRs are tickets that the driver has been given. So you may see someone who has one of those improper tickets, improper lane change. Well, that kind of clues me in that that person may have had an accident. But since the MVR doesn't tell us directly whether people have had accidents or not, it's a good idea, especially for accidents that happen as part of the job, that you keep track of that. If you've got employees who are out there and they backed into a pole or bumped another car or whatever, keep track of that as an accident. You know it happened. And so you can keep your own records on accidents that you're aware of that employees have had, especially if they happen on the job. There's a difference on the MVR of the type of violations that we see. Some violations will stay on the MVR for 3 years. Some violations will stay on the MVR for 10 years. So usually what we're seeing with 10-year violations, those are a drug or alcohol-related offense. Sometimes they may have had their record cleared, so it doesn't actually say DUI or DWI on there, but it'll still show a conviction date or an action date. And if it's still showing up on the MVR after 3 years, we're pretty sure that that was a drug-related offense. 3-year violations are your normal moving violations. And so most of the tickets that we see on an MVR will just stay on for 3 years and they drop off. And we keep track of that when we're monitoring your drivers that you submit the information to us. And we let you know when those tickets have dropped off. When you're choosing a driver qualification policy, really it's your discretion what is going to qualify a driver or not. Now, we have written a couple of different sample policies over the last couple of years that we've shared with many of you, but when we send those out, it's still not necessarily something that we expect you to just to adopt wholesale. We want you to take a look at it, take a look at your drivers, take a look at the needs of your city, what you believe is reasonable, and you decide what you think that qualification is going to be. But we do want to make sure that we are looking at the MVR so we know that the license is valid, so we know what kind of information is on there for making that decision. But you do have discretion. This isn't a program where the trust is imposing a specific policy on you. You could tell your drivers that, 1 ticket is a deal breaker. That might be kind of extreme. You may decide to draw the line at 2 or 3. That's really up to you, but we've got some samples that we've sent out there and have given you the opportunity to adopt a policy. It's really important, though, that you do have some criteria that you've set for deciding whether a person is qualified to be driving your vehicles or not. In fact, this metric here is something we put on the first sample that we sent out last year that you can just kind of take a look at and made it kind of easy. So many accidents and so many violations on the person's record, would determine whether they were acceptable, borderline, or unacceptable. And so you could make it as simple as that, or you could make it a little more detailed as to identifying, what is going to be acceptable or not. And we do have those samples that you can take a look at. We want to make sure we're qualifying all drivers. All drivers is people who are operating our vehicles, but it's also people operating their own vehicles for city, district, county business. And so, I'm traveling, to a conference that I'm going to. Well, I'm driving my personal car, but I'm traveling for work. You still have liability exposure when an employee is operating their personal vehicle. And so we don't want to just look at those who are driving our city-owned or district or county-owned vehicles. We also want to think about people who are driving even their own vehicles as a work function. We want to make sure for our TAP program, for our Trust Accountability program, we require that you take a look at the driver's MVR at least once a year. However, the program that we are offering, the service that we're offering when we monitor the records for you, we will give you a report every month as to what's going on with that driver's record. Remember, just showing the card, the ID, the driver's license, does not mean that they have a valid license. Even if it says that the license isn't expired, you don't know what has occurred, on the record end of that license. And so it's really important that we look at the MVR, not just the license. We use the MVR and the known history of that driver in making this judgment whether they should be driving our vehicles or not. Jason,
I did the poll.
What do we see on these polls?
The vast majority of folks who responded on there, about 88%, are actually monitoring their employees' driving records at this point. As we asked about policy, though, then it was about, about 2/3 have a policy in place, and about 1/3 did not.
Well, that's good. So we're making some good progress out there. I'm pleased that you are doing that. And if you're involved with the Trust MVR program, there may be some things that you've seen on the monthly report that we send out to you that you may question. What does it mean, or what exactly does this mean? What are we looking for? So I want to take a little bit of time and go over, some of the things that we see on an MVR, what they mean, and what does the report mean with the information we're giving you on the monthly report. So this slide right here shows you basically what a motor vehicle record looks like. The first page has the employee's full name, birthday. You all know my birthday now. And it gives their zip code. It does not give their home address. It does not give their social security number. And if actually you look up there on that top line, it only gives the last 4 digits of the driver's license number. The driver's license number is 9 digits, and so we only see the last 4. Excuse me. And so it's important that we get that complete driver's license number. If you send us the employee's name and birthday, we can run the MVR, but we can't have it in our monitoring program unless we have the full driver's license number. And so lots of times we have these that have been sent in. We've been able to, take a look at the MVR because we have the name and the birthday, but without that full 9-digit number correct, we can't do the monthly monitoring because the system that we use for automatically monitoring those records requires that full 9-digit driver's license number. So if you have seen on any of your reports where we're asking for a complete driver's license number, that's why we need that, because it really slows us down every month when we're checking these records if we don't have that number. So that's the most important piece of data that you give us is the driver's license number. We can pretty much find out everything else we need from that. you'll see status on there. So after the name and the birthday and the zip code, you see it says license status there. On this one, it says valid. That's where we know if we have a valid license or not, if it says valid or something else, and we'll go over some of those. It'll also show when the license was issued, when it expires. It'll show the class code for the license, whether it's a commercial A, B, C license or whether it's a standard D license. And it'll show us the commercial status. So basically on this page, we're seeing two different driver's licenses. You know, we have the regular driver's license and the commercial license. And so we'll see that status. You know, hopefully they'll say valid on both of those if the driver is a CDL driver. Of course, I don't have a CDL license, so on mine there where it says commercial status code, there's nothing because I don't have that license. But we can have an invalid license on both of those lines or just on one of them. So again, you'll see here I've highlighted valid. That's what we're looking for. We want to make sure that our drivers do have a valid license, but sometimes we'll run them and we see moved in that status code line there. And what it means when it says moved is that driver at some point has turned in their Utah license for the license of another state. And so when we get these moved licenses, it's really common sometimes if at the north end of the state or the south or the east end of the state where we have cities close to the border, you know, whether it's Arizona, Colorado, or Idaho, where you have a driver who lives in a neighboring state but works for you, and so they have a license from that other state. Maybe they used to have a Utah license, and so this says moved on there. If it says moved on the status line, that's not a valid license. That Utah license is not valid anymore, and it doesn't give us any information to monitor that. If you do give us the license number for someone who has an out-of-state record, we can't monitor that. Our system that we use accesses the Utah Driver's License Division, and it doesn't access any nationwide database. And so it's important that if you have a driver qualification program in place and you have out-of-state drivers that work for you because you know, they live in another state, then it's important that you work with your drivers to get copies of their MVR from their home state so that you can be consistent in applying these standards to all your drivers. So that kind of could be a little inconvenient when you do have drivers who live in another state. If you have drivers, though, that live in Utah and their license is from another state, they need to get a Utah license. And, you know, they can't be here for, 6 months, a year, still be operating on a California license or a license from another state. It's very important that you get that Utah license if they are living in Utah. The next one we might see is an expired license, and it amazes me how often we see these come up expired, and lots of times it's not just expired a few weeks ago. I mean, they come up expired 4, 5, 6 months ago, and so again, that could look really bad if you have a driver who's driving your vehicle and they get in an accident and guess what? They don't have a valid license because it expired. And so that will pop up on here frequently. We know that that driver needs to take care of getting their license renewed. Also, we'll see suspended on this status code. And a suspended license, usually there's a reason why their license has been suspended for a period of time. So someone who has a suspended license, generally their license will become unsuspended, within a certain period of time unless they fail to do something that they need to do in the meantime. Of course, that's going to depend on why it was suspended. It could have been suspended because they didn't have insurance, or, there could be a lot of different reasons. But usually suspended means that that license will be valid again. But in the meantime, while it's suspended, we don't want them driving for us. And so we make sure that those people who have invalid licenses are removed from our authorized driver list, while those licenses are not valid. We'll also see denied on this line frequently. And what we're usually running into with a denied record is a CDL operator who has submitted their medical records to the driver's license division, and there was some information missing on that paperwork. Generally, there's a box that needs to be checked verifying a certain status or information, and lots of times that box doesn't get checked. And so when the driver's license division enters that information into their system to update their system, with that missing information, they put your license in a denied status. The crazy thing about this is that when they do this, they don't inform the driver. We've seen dozens and dozens of these, and probably the vast majority of those 140 invalid licenses we found are commercial drivers whose licenses have been put in denied status because of some missing information on paperwork that was submitted. And so the driver doesn't know that he doesn't have a valid license. And I've run into this many times when, I send out the report and it shows a driver who's denied, and they call back and they say, this driver, says that he submitted all the paperwork and he's good and there's no problem, but you actually check the record and he doesn't have a valid license. So when you see that on the report, denied on the driver's license status, that's really important that that driver go and talk to the driver's license division and get that straightened out. Sometimes people will call me and say, well, this MVR is wrong. This information is wrong. I can't fix it. I'm just looking at what's in the system. So if a driver has a concern or a disagreement with the information that's on the MVR, they need to contact the driver's license division and determine what the discrepancy is and what needs to be done to correct it. All I'm doing is passing on the information. Another thing that we'll see is revoked, and of course that's lots of times we'll see these in a situation where someone has multiple DUIs or something where their license is just taken away from them. It doesn't exist anymore. That we don't see very often, but they do pop up from time to time. And I explained also before that we have the status of the driver's license and we have the commercial status. So if you have a CDL operator, these two lines where it says commercial status and just regular status, we want to see valid on both of those lines if they need to be operating a commercial vehicle. Sometimes, like I already mentioned, when there's a missing information on the medical forms that are submitted, it doesn't just disqualify the CDL portion of the license. They deny the license altogether until that information is provided. So when we have that situation pop up, it does mean that that person shouldn't be driving anything, not just commercial vehicles, because it does put both sides of their license in a denied or disqualified state. You can sometimes see where just the CDL portion was disqualified. Certain violations, if someone with a CDL license commits certain violations, it automatically disqualifies their commercial license, but not their regular license. And so sometimes we may see disqualified on the commercial status, but still showing valid on the regular status for that license. In this situation, we need to make sure that that driver is not driving any heavy equipment, anything that requires a CDL license for part of their job. Even though they have a valid license, that CDL may need to be valid as well. The next thing I kind of want to show you is the report that we've been sending out and kind of explain different things that might pop up on there. This is the top portion of a report that we send out every month. Those of you that are in the program have probably seen these. And what you see in the performance box at the top there tells us how many drivers we show on our master file for you as driving for your entity. And then we'll let you know some general information. How many of those have a denied license or otherwise invalid license? How many of them have 3 violations or more? So we have a box there for 3 violations and a box for 4 violations or more. And you'll notice I color code the 3 violations orange and I color code the 4 or more violations as red. In my personal opinion, if you've got a driver with 4 or more violations on their record, they probably shouldn't be authorized to drive a vehicle. But then again, we're not imposing that standard on you, but as a general rule, that's a pretty good one to think about when you're determining what your qualification is. Incomplete data. This is sometimes we'll get a driver record and the license number is wrong. When we go to run the record off the license number, it doesn't work because there's a digit that's got the wrong number or it's missing a number or something. It could also be that other information that we need is missing. We can't run a record off the information that you've provided. In fact, there's someone that I know in the pool who their information was submitted a month or 2 ago, and I know this person really well, and I've been working with them for 9 years, and I can't get the MVR to run on that person. So when we send the report back and it says incomplete data, we really need you to take a look at that information and make sure that we have an accurate number, that we have, an accurate name and birthday. If we're not able to get the records, that will help us. We also see on here drivers with violations. That helps us calculate what we call a violator rate. So if I've got 78 drivers, 7 of them have violations on their records, then that's 8.97% violator rate. And so we just usually, when we send you the report each month, you'll see that on there to see how you compare to the rest of the pool. For the current month, for the August reports that I've just finished putting together, we have a violator rate pool-wide of 15.7%. So 15.7% of our 8,500 drivers have at least one violation on their record. If your violator rate, if this was your report and your violator rate was 9%, that means you're doing better than the rest of the pool, and I'll color code that green because you're doing better. If you're doing worse than the pool average, then I'll color code that red to let you know that you've got a higher frequency of violations among your drivers than what is average for the pool. As we look down through the report here, you'll see in ABC City, we've got Michael Jackson has 3 speeding tickets. So I've color-coded him orange for you so that, you pay attention to that one. You may want to address this with this employee, or 3 speeding tickets may be a disqualifier by your policy that you've adopted. Jane Smith, she's got 4 violations, and so I color-coded her red. Lancelot, he's got 1 speeding ticket. I don't color code that one, but it's on the report so you know who's had any kind of speeding tickets that are currently on their records. We've got Harley David there. He's got an expired license. And so when it says over in the additions column, added August-expired license, well, that means that I just got that record this last month and their license is expired. Sometimes you'll see, like on the next ones down where we've got, Puff Dragon is got denied license, and I said invalid license rechecked in August. That means whenever it says rechecked in the current month, that is telling you that he was invalid the prior month, and I checked him again, and he's still invalid this month. So that person has been on there with an invalid license more than 1 month. And it's really important that you take a look at those. If these people really are on your authorized driver list and they're showing up month after month as an invalid license, I really hope they're not authorized drivers. Let us know they're not authorized drivers. We'll remove them from your list until they are an authorized driver, and then you'll let us know and we'll add them back on. And that way they're not affecting your violator rate. We can take them and all the tickets on their records out of your calculation of your violator rate. And then we'll just, when they are authorized to drive again, then we'll put them back in the system. I left this one on here for Mrs. Robinson about no insurance, and that's kind of an important one, especially where we have employees who are driving their personal vehicles as part of the job. If you have an employee who is operating their own vehicle while they're working, it's important that they have insurance. If they don't have insurance, then you're on the hook for an accident they have, even though it's on their their own car. In fact, even if they have insurance, if the damages from that accident exceed the limits of their own personal policy, then your policy then covers that because it was an accident that happened while they were working for you. So you may, if you do have employees that you reimburse them mileage for use of their own personal vehicle because they're driving it on the job, make sure that they have insurance as well so that you are at least covered from those first dollars of an incident, and they're not going to come and have a claim against you until it exceeds the driver's limits on their own policy. You'll see in the next section on this report where it says violations deleted / status changed. When we have someone whose violation is 3 years old, we take it off the record. It doesn't calculate into their violator rate anymore, and I move it for the next month after it came off. I move it into this category so you can see that that record came off. Or the example here where we got Lance Mergens, his license is now valid. That means it was invalid. It was expired last month, but when we checked it this month, he'd renewed his license, and so I let you know I've taken that off as a violation and have it's now a valid license. And when I figure the violator rate, I do count an invalid license as a violation. So if they have 2 speeding tickets and an invalid license, I actually count that as 3 violations for purposes of the report that we do here for you. The bottom part of this report will say information needed, and this is where I really need to ask you to please take a look at this section, because these sections tend to get this information down there and it stays there a long time. The first example on there, we got Jimmy John. His name and birthday and his driver's license number that was given it, none of it produced a record. And so we need you to go back, double check his driver's license number and give us that information so that we can, get an MVR on him. If it could be that he just has given us, wrong information, that he's hiding, his true record or something, or it could just been a simple mistake. But, lots of times we'll ask for this information because we can't monitor their record unless we have that complete information, especially the driver's license number. Robin Q. Hood, he's got a California driver's license. You can, lots of times out-of-state license numbers start with a letter, or there'll be a slightly different format. Not all the time, but like I mentioned already, we can't monitor out-of-state records. So if you do have drivers that do live in another state and they're operating under a license from another state, make sure that you have a procedure in place for at least annually getting a copy of the MVR from their home state. In these next sections, I'll also put information in here if we do have invalid licenses, just giving you a little bit more information about what needs to be done. Puff Dragon, his license is denied. And so this is probably, missing information on medical forms for the CDL. So driver must contact the DLD for resolution. Driver should not be driving until license status is valid. So I give you in this section just a little bit more information about that denied status or that invalid license status and what needs to be done. And again, if these problems aren't going to be resolved, then we would appreciate you letting us know that that person is not authorized to drive vehicles, and we'll remove them from the list, and all that information will not calculate into your violator rate. Same thing for an expired license or for a license that's been suspended. I'll just put a little information in there explaining that the driver needs to, take some sort of action to resolve these issues, and just some basic information about what that should be.
Hey, Doug, before we go on, could we answer a question?
Yes.
Question is, elected city officials will drive their own vehicles to meetings and conferences. The city then reimburses their mileage expenses. Should they be considered authorized drivers for driver qualification program purposes?
Yeah, most of our members have been submitting council members and other regular volunteers. If you've got someone who's a regular volunteer that is authorized to drive vehicles or drives any vehicle on city business, then we want to include them in the program. It makes it a little bit more difficult where there are elected officials to authorize them to drive, and you just may, if they come up with just a really horrible driving record, you may let them know that we can't authorize you to drive on city business. You'll need to carpool with somebody, but you may have to think about a different standard. As of yet, I haven't had anything come up on any elected officials that really puts them in that horrible category on their driving record, but do for sure that is a liability exposure for you, and you should be considering whether you want to authorize them, and you would apply the same standard that you apply to your employees.
And what we've found with most organizations that we talk to is they say, well, this is an opportunity for us to say, yeah, we're monitoring the average employee and volunteer, but we're in the pool as well. Everybody's being monitored because this is the right thing to do to protect our liabilities, and we've really had pretty good success with most of those situations.
Absolutely. Any other questions?
That's what we've got right now.
Okay, so just to let you know, this program, we've been doing this for about the last year and a half using the information that I've just explained to you today. We are currently in the process of developing a web-based application that will allow you to enter your driver information online through a secure web portal, and you will be able to manage your a list of drivers yourself, and the reports will be generated automatically. And so what this will do will allow you to have more real-time access to the information. You can go, there'll be a website where you'll be able to go on and print out your driver report anytime you need to. If you've got a driver that's been terminated or has quit and is no longer in your employ, you can go in there and you can update your driver's list, immediately yourself. If need to add somebody, it's the same thing. And so it'll give you better access to this information in a more real-time fashion, and it will streamline the process for us as well. So you'll also be able to get your reports, your monthly reports, instead of getting them when I manage to get through them and send them out to you. You'll get them, on a regular scheduled day every month. Well, those will be automatically sent to you, and it will have a little different format and look, but should give you the same information that we've just talked about, and maybe even a little bit additional information beyond what we've talked about. We're just barely in the process of beta testing the application now, so hopefully in the next month or two we'll be rolling out this web-based application for managing this the MVR program. That will involve you more directly and give you an easier way to access that information and update that information than going through us. And now we can say, are there any other questions? I would like to, just kind of throw in here, lots of times we do get a little bit of concern. I've had several entities that initially did not want to participate. They didn't like the idea of running the records, that it was maybe too personal information or what have you. And so I've seen several members that did push back on this quite a bit, but invariably, when they get that first report and they see, the information, they recognize the value of it. And we've had just almost unanimous appreciation for the report once people get in the program and see it. So if you're not sure something you want to do, I promise you will appreciate the information. And it's also, if you're covered, with the trusts, on your liability, your automobile liability coverage through the trust, we are actually requiring this information just like any other insurance company would require driver's license numbers and check driver's license records occasionally. So it may be voluntary for those of you who don't have all lines of coverage with us, but if you're in the auto liability program, we need you to submit this information. And it will help you as well as us.
So question, what is the cost of the driver qualification program?
There's absolutely no cost because you are government entities and because we are a government entity, we are not charged for running the motor vehicle records. In fact, normally there would be a $9 per record fee. So on all those 8,000 records, normally, a private company would have to pay $9 a record to get this information that you are getting for free. And not only do you get it for free, but we put together the platform and the program so that you don't have to compile all this information. So there is absolutely no cost to you. All you need to do is submit the initial data, and then we make sure we put the bill for payroll and time to put all the reports together and make that available to you in a format that's hopefully easily understood.
Okay, I think that's all the questions we have.
Excellent. Well, we appreciate those of you who are participating and have submitted your information already. And those of you who have not yet, we hope to see your information soon, because it is a valuable tool in helping control our greatest exposure that we have out there. It's important that we use it. It's important that we be prudent in making decisions based on the information that we have. And this is a biggie. This really is a biggie. It means life or death, often, who we decide to put behind the wheel. And it's kind of sad when the signs are there ahead of time and they weren't seen, and something could have been prevented, no matter what the hazards are that we're talking about.
Okay, great, Doug. Thank you. We do have the vast majority of members are already in the program, but as we get done today, we'll finish the recording, post it up on the website, as well as send out the materials. We'll send out the boilerplate policy for your review, as well as the spreadsheet that we use to collect the information on your drivers if you haven't done that yet. Okay, thank you very much, Doug. I appreciate it. Great job. And everybody have a good, safe day out there.
Thanks. Bye-bye.